Paris, 1943. The Marais holds its breath as two SS officers drift through a narrow lane, boots on wet stone, laughter kept close to their throats. A doorway opens into shadow. From inside the dark, a hand lifts a stubby tube, the muzzle steady, the stance calm. One muted click cuts the street. The lead officer folds with no echo, only the slap of leather and steel against cobble. The promise of tonight is simple. By the end, you'll understand how a bolt-action tube rewrote the rules of fear in occupied cities. Stick with me, because the mechanics behind this whispering pistol are stranger than fiction, and the consequences were anything but quiet. For more War in the Shadows dissections, subscribe before we vanish back into the dark. Months before that lane went still, a British cell had studied the problem of sound. The Special Operations Executive, born to sabotage and subversion, needed a way to put individuals down without waking an entire block. A noisy pistol had been suicide in an occupied city. Patrols converged on echoes, curfews tightened, collaborators multiplied, and a single muzzle report could domino into arrests. At the Fryth in Hertfordshire, SOE's Station 9 took the brief. Major Hugh Reeves, an engineer with a habit of starting from first principles, led a small team behind plain doors and blank files. They settled on 2 calibers and one idea: a 9mm model, later called MKI, and a 32 ACP model, later called MK2, both built around an integral suppressor that made gas behave. For starters, the sonic crack had to vanish. The 32 ran subsonic on its own, and the 9mm barrel was ported to bleed velocity below the speed of sound before the bullet even left the bore. Suppressor volume then did the heavy lifting. Gas bled from the ported barrel into a long tube punctuated by expansion chambers and baffles that spread and cooled it before it met the night air. Self-loading was sacrificed to silence. The pistol used a hand-cycled bolt. Rotate, withdraw, eject, feed, and lock, all under muscular control and without a slide slamming home. Because of that choice, mechanical noise fell to a whisper. There was no reciprocating mass, no spring snap, only a short metallic cam and the soft rasp of brass. Grip and magazine were made the same part. A detachable box of cartridges doubled as the handle, allowing the weapon to break down into anonymous shapes that looked like plumbing, not a gun. Sights were stubs and the finish mate. There were few marks and fewer clues to British origin. A decision made to protect networks if a cache was found under a loose board. Production was compartmentalized. Workers machined tubes or bolts or magazines, but almost none saw the assembled tool, and crates left without stories attached. By early 1943, small batches were flowing to France, Belgium, Denmark, and Poland. OSS contacts in neutral ports received crates as well, passing them down lines that were always frayed. The weapon had limits that were understood and accepted. It was built for single-digit meters, for 2 or 3 shots at most before cycling, and for missions that valued silence over speed. Range was curtailed by design. The ported 9mm lost energy. The 32 began with little, and both punished sloppy shot placement beyond a few paces. Wipes and baffles wore with use. After a handful of rounds, rubber elements and gas paths degraded, creeping the report up from a cough to a flat pop if not serviced. Maintenance mattered. Agents were taught to keep the internals dry of oil where heat could aerosolize it, to replace wipe elements at intervals, and to never rely on a tired tube for a deep exfiltration. Tactics filled the gap. Close approach, often from the side or rear, made shot placement easy and wind irrelevant. The muzzle could be pressed into cloth to smother remaining gas. Contact shots came with their own rules. The operator had to keep the port vents clear, angle slightly to avoid a feed jam by cloth pressure, and expect a thud louder than the shot. Positioning solved risk. A stairwell landing, a narrow hallway, a cafe booth with a wall at the back. These controlled space stopped bodies from falling loudly and gave the shooter a short path to the door. Timing was a weapon. Agents moved when tramcars squealed, when a lorry backfired, when clocks chimed, and when rain masked footsteps and muffled the sound of a bolt handle. Clothing carried the plan. A coat with a deep pocket let the tube ride muzzle down, a scarf hid the front end, and gloves caught ejected casings that could betray a path. The draw was practiced to economy. The pistol left the pocket already indexed, sights ignored at arm's length, the operator aiming by shoulder line and rib cage instead of a front blade. Training borrowed from butchery rather than marksmanship. 2 rounds center chest at contact distance, or one to the base of the skull if the angle revealed it, then a second through lungs if the target twitched. Exfiltration drills were as scripted as the shot. Pocket the casing, rotate and withdraw the bolt to extract heat from the chamber, magazine back in, and walk, never run, until the next corner. When meetings happened in cafes, cups clinked to cover the cue. An operator stirred sugar slow, moved the saucer, then rose as the target checked a watch, the shot taken between 2 other sounds. Hotel corridors had their choreography. Elevators brought footfalls, doors breathed air into the hall, and the operative stepped from a service alcove, put 2 rounds in, and ghosted into the stairwell. Bicycle approaches worked in streets that were too watched for cars. A rider coasted, feet off pedals, hands on brakes, one palm released to present the tube for a single contact shot at walking pace. When engines covered the report, agents used it. The clatter of a delivery van over cobbles, the grind of a bus clutch, the hiss of steam, all bought a window of 2 seconds. If a misfire came, protocol was to hold the muzzle on target for a full slow count. Hangfires could turn an error into a disaster if the operator racked early and a delayed round detonated in the chamber. Ejection was by choice, rather than habit. Some carried a handkerchief to trap hot brass, others used a gloved palm, and many reinserted spent cases into the magazine before leaving. Caches were built with the pistol in mind. Rubberized wraps kept damp from wipes, small oil ampules rode alongside, and extra magazines were stashed with wax paper around the feed lips. Cover stories wrapped the weapon. A mechanic's toolkit, a plumber's roll, a rolled-up bedding strap. Anything to make a metal tube look ordinary if a pocket ever turned inside out under a gendarme's stare. Distribution handled risk like a fuse. Cells received 1 pistol and a handful of rounds, not crates. If a network burned, the blast radius stayed small. Operators learned to accept what the pistol could not do. It would not save a bad approach, it would not punch through heavy clothing at distance, and it would not forgive a flinch. Yet it did one thing better than anything else of the war. It turned noise into a choice. In Paris, the choice comes now. The man in the doorway steps once, 2 paces behind the officers, and angles left to keep his muzzle away from a coat hem. The tube rises to the lower ribs. He squeezes, and the sound is a camera shutter heard from across a room. The officer folds into the wall, sliding down like a coat, losing its hanger. A pivot turns the shooter into the second man. Confusion puts the target's chin up and eyes wide, and another muted click drops him, the bullet taking blood to air without a shout. Hands move with practiced calm. The bolt handle rotates down a fraction, then up and back, a case hot as a match head into a gloved palm. It disappears into the pocket with a practiced press. The pistol tilts, checks chamber glow, locks, and vanishes beneath the coat. A breath is let out slow, hands settle, and the man walks past a trash cart without breaking rhythm. Around the corner, a bicycle waits with a flat tire. It is a decoy for one purpose, to make hands busy and posture harmless if anyone turns that corner and wonders why a stranger stands on a lane with two bodies cooling. Minutes later, the lane regains its sounds. A shutter thumps, a cat slips past, and boots arrive, but they look for a knife, a fight, a pistol's bark. They find neither and shout without answers. Elsewhere, a stairwell becomes a chamber. In Lyon, a man climbs toward a lit landing, a leather briefcase beating a clock's tick, and an agent stands in the gloom between floors, shoulder turned. There is no greeting. A cough of air and a soft impact. The target slumps forward into the banister, and the shooter guides the body down to keep the sound small, then cycles once and tucks away. In Brussels, a hotel corridor is a tunnel with carpets that drink noise. A waiter's cart rolls past, a door opens on a chime, and a collaborator steps out with a smile that never gets to finish. 2 rounds low and close, taken at arm's length. The cart keeps moving. The agent slides behind it. The bolt hand works blind under a folded napkin, and the elevator doors close long before anyone decides the silence is wrong. The pistol's rhythm becomes city rhythm. Cafe doors sigh, tram wheels complain, rain taps on glass, and somewhere in the noise, a hand sizes distance in steps rather than meters. Each time, the operator decides whether to risk a second shot. The calculus is simple. If the first round did not end movement, the second strikes the triangle between collarbone and heart, then the shooter leaves. German response tightens with every unexplained body. Patrols pair off, officers take cars for short walks, and night streets fill with sudden checks. But the weapon is built to slip through checks as silence rather than force. Meanwhile, caches move like migrating birds. A pistol spends a week under a bakery floor, a night in a church loft, an hour inside a hollow chair leg, and then lands in a different hand at a different corner with the same mission. By early 1945, habits are set on both sides. Agents approach from the rear quarter, take the shot at the first opportunity, break contact within 3 turns, and both sides know that a gunfight is a failure of planning. Immediate aftermath was measured in minutes and in miles. Operators exfiltrated on foot to safe rooms, passed the pistol to a courier by prearranged touch, then disappeared to be debriefed days later under different names. Bodies drew cordons and suspicions instead of trails. Medical reports blamed knives or small-caliber pistols, while security chiefs argued over ghosts they could not hear. Records vary on the exact number of pistols that circulated. The effect mattered less for body counts than for posture. Fear forced occupying forces to burn time on escorts, checkpoints, and second-guessing. And that slowness helped resistance groups survive to strike again. At scale, operations gained space. Rumor and uncertainty became tools as effective as explosives because every quiet killing implied a network larger than it was. Security procedures shifted under pressure. Patrols adopted 2-man rules, officers altered routes and hours, and urban sweeps turned inward, while Allied services kept the design classified and in reserve for decades. Post-war, parts of the method became doctrine. Agencies trained for contact distance shots, for bolt cycling without looking, and for exfiltration that exploited sound rather than outran it. The pragmatic lesson was not romance, but arithmetic. In clandestine work, signature control bought more survival than firepower, and the right compromise, slow, close, quiet, could move an occupation one cautious step at a time. If you want more hard-edged stories of the tools that bent WO2 in the shadows, subscribe and stay with this channel for the next operation.